What's up, y'all? This is the third episode of the Sovereign Individual Podcast, and we're talking about sex work. Ooh, boy. So, nothing too graphic as far as any sort of descriptions of sexual activities or anything like that, but it is talking about prostitution, so sexual stuff is brought up. Just wanted to give people fair warning. If that's not up their alley, you may want to tune out of this episode. So, again, nothing too incredibly detailed or graphic, but just wanted to give that heads up. Thanks again to Flavor Aid for providing the intro music that you're about to hear. Their EP release party is going to be May 31st at Stubbs here in Austin, Texas. And their new single, Ghost in Me, is available on Spotify and all streaming services. So it's Flavor Aid, Flavor, and then Raid, Raid. So check them out. They're an awesome local band. And enjoy the third episode of the podcast. Alright, welcome back, y'all. This is episode number 3 of the Sovereign Individual Podcast. My name is Eric Guerra, and I am your host. Today, we're going to try to keep this episode a little bit shorter. The first 2 episodes were, right around an hour for each. That's not necessarily what I'm intending for the podcast length to be every time. I'm not sticking to any sort of hard number or hard cutoff. Whatever topics that I'm talking about, I want to talk about and be able to get everything out that I want to say. So it's not as if I'm going to be working on any sort of real stiff time or cutoff or anything like that. But my intention is to kind of keep it more in the 30-minute range for topics a lot of the times, and just I think those work a little bit better for episodes, so 30 to 45 minute range. But obviously that first episode had the intro and kind of talking about stuff that took up kind of the first half of it, and then had a lot to say about Venezuela, and so that one went about an hour as well. So we're going to try to keep it a little bit shorter here with episode number 3, and we're going to be talking about consensual transactions between adult individuals. So basically, sex work is the specific topic that we're going to be talking about today. This is in the news because of Robert Kraft, who is the owner of the New England Patriots, also the owner of the New England Revolution, a Major League Soccer team. So he owns 2 different sports franchises in the New England area. The Patriots just won the Super Bowl at the beginning of February. There's 6 Super Bowl in the past 20 years or whatever it's been. They beat my Chiefs to get there, which sucks. And so all of this kind of came to a head because Mr. Kraft was indicted, or he was charged with, rather. He's caught up in a sting in Jupiter, Florida, in a prostitution sting. He was going to a massage parlor and getting so they refer to it as oral sex, and then manual sex, which is the use of the hand to stimulate. So basically rub and tug, happy ending massage is what he was getting there. And all this kind of occurred timeline wise right around the AFC Championship game, at least the 2 specific times in question that Mr. Kraft was charged with it. So obviously he's a really high profile figure. I'm not aware of any owner of a major sports franchise getting caught up in something like this. At least in America, I can't think, at least in the almost 25 years-ish that I've been watching football religiously, and then as I got older started adding more sports into the mix. I can't think of an owner that's been caught up in something like this. Perhaps maybe overseas, maybe a owner of a soccer club or something has had something like this occur, but as far as I know and can speak on, this is the first time somebody of his caliber has ever been caught up in something like this. So it's obviously in the news and being talked about a lot. And there's kind of a lot to break down here, and it definitely ties into the liberty movement and kind of libertarianism in general. So we're going to kind of break down what that looks like. So I'll kind of just start with the facts of the case and everything that came about. So Mr. Kraft, this occurred during the AFC Championship weekend, so January 19th, which would have been the Saturday before the game. He went to this massage parlor in Jupiter, Florida, and paid for oral and manual, paid for a rub and tug and oral sex. And then he went again the morning of the 20th, which was the actual game day, and then later that day flew out to Kansas City to be at Arrowhead Stadium for the AFC Championship game. So those two specific instances are the ones that he's been charged with, and it's kind of knee-jerk reaction is to kind of laugh about it and joke about it, especially in the world of sports, and especially it being the owner of the Patriots, which is probably the most hated team in the NFL right now, just by and large, because they've been so good for so long. Most people tend to just kind of hate them, and they're sick of it, which I totally get. And I mean, I can, as my knee-jerk reaction as I'm reading all this, and this all came to light, excuse me, and especially as the timeline came to light, my knee-jerk is like, they couldn't have arrested him on the morning of the AFC Championship and thrown the Patriots into complete disarray right before they had to play my Chiefs, and maybe my Chiefs end up in the Super Bowl instead. But so it's easy to kind of look at the situation in that kind of light, but there's obviously a lot of facets that go into this and a lot of dark sides of this that I kind of wanted to get into, and specifically talking about where this plays in with the larger liberty movement in general, and kind of the stance that most people and most people in the liberty movement and most libertarians feel about this. So speaking from the Libertarian Party is the only major party that has a specific plank in regarding sex work. So I say major party. That's not like an overinflated ego about where the Libertarian Party stands. I'm very aware that it is a third party, and that 5% or so is the threshold in the state of Texas that has to be reached in a statewide race to keep ballot access, and that's a tough threshold to hit. So I'm not referring to us as a major party in any way, trying to conflate us with the old parties or put us up on their same level. I just say major because we're the only other party besides Democrats and Republicans that were on all 50 state ballots in 2016. So even the Green Party was only on, I want to say, like 23. I'm pretty positive it was less than 50% of the ballots. It might have been 22, but that's the next closest one. So we're the only other party that's on all 50 ballots. That's the only thing I mean by major. I'm not trying to play up and make the Libertarian Party out to be more than what it is. It's growing, but Libertarian Party definitely is not a major player, I would say. But I would consider us a major party just because, like I said, we're the only other party on all 50 ballots. But so of those three parties that every single person in the country in 2016 was able to vote for, we're the only one that has any sort of stance specifically regarding sex work. So I'm going to read that right now, just so people kind of get an idea of where this is being approached from, and the manner in which it's being approached from. So it's in the Libertarian Party platform. So this was added this past election cycle in 2018 at the National Convention for the Libertarian Party that was in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was unfortunately unable to go. I always have a good time participating in these type of events, and then especially I love the city of New Orleans. It's such a fun and enjoyable city to go to, but I just started my new job right before, so I unfortunately wasn't able to go. But this was passed while the convention goes on and things are voted on as to if they should be added to the to the platform, and there's wording and things get edited and all that kind of stuff. But so this was added, so it's section 2, so 2.10210, sex work. The Libertarian Party supports the decriminalization of prostitution. We assert the right of consenting adults to provide sexual services to clients for compensation, and the rights of clients to purchase sexual services from consenting sex workers, end quote. So that's kind of, at least from a libertarian and liberty mindset, where this problem is approached from, by and large, is the main point of that is the word consent. Obviously, we're talking about two consenting individuals, two consenting adults choosing to engage in this sort of behavior and an agreed upon payment amount that's going to occur. It's a big thing within the movement that the state has no business involving itself in consensual activities between individuals. Again, big thing is consent, obviously, so we're going to get more into kind of, obviously there's the trafficking part of it and the horribleness that goes along with that. And that's obviously not what we're referring to, and that's not what's meant when talking about the legalization of prostitution. But strictly from a moral standpoint, you do not have the right to interfere as an individual in the consenting interactions between two adults, and certainly you don't have the right to bring in the state in order to do so as well. Regardless of how you feel about the idea of prostitution and exchanging money for sex, you may find that morally reprehensible, as is your right, but it is completely immoral to use the power of the state in order to keep other people from engaging in that activity and to force, through the use of state force, make them adhere to your moral compass, as opposed to what they consider to be moral or morally okay within their purview. So that's kind of a big part of it too, is the idea within the liberty movement of no victim, no crime. So in the case of consenting individuals choosing to exchange money for sex, there's no victim there, and therefore you cannot have a crime. And getting the state involved, I mean, so basically when you're talking about bringing the state into any sort of situation, what you have to ask yourself is, what are you willing to lock somebody in a cage over? What offense can be committed by them that you are okay with taking them at gunpoint and locking them in a cage for a specific amount of time? And so I mean that's kind of a question for individuals to answer as they see fit. But I have a hard time agreeing with people that, or seeing from the point of view of people that would be willing to lock somebody else in a cage for engaging in activity that they just happen to find morally wrong, or it makes them feel icky, whatever the hell it is. That's fine for you to feel that way. It's absolutely not okay to use the power of the state to lock those people in a cage. Again, no victim, no crime. If nobody is being aggressed upon, you don't have the right to interfere in that interaction in any way, shape, or form. You certainly don't have the right to take any of the people involved and lock them in a cage in some sort of morally superior attempt at controlling behavior, because that's what, at the end of the day, that's what it is you're using the power of the state and the power of being able to throw somebody in a cage to enforce a type of morality that you believe in and to control the behavior of individuals that don't happen to agree with how you view the morality of such an exchange. So it's really, it's just, there's no reason for the state to be involved in any way, shape, or form in something like this. And so when you're talking, so obviously we had the situation with Mr. Kraft, and it's a really, because the thing is too, when especially when you're talking about something like prostitution and sex work, it's a really, logically, it's a tough argument to make, and it's you gotta go roundabout in a lot of ways to try to somehow explain it. So it's legal in some places, first of all. Like it's legal in Nevada to be a prostitute, but not here in the state of Florida. So that's weird, first of all, that it would be okay to engage in this activity in certain places but not others. So you got logical inconsistency there. It's legal to be a stripper, exotic dancer, whatever you want to call it. So it's legal to take off your clothing in exchange for money. So again, it's not quite the exchange of sex, but anybody who goes, I mean, there was that famous Stormy Daniels of, the hush money that was paid by Trump. She was the porn star that he had sex with. She got arrested in Ohio. She was at a strip club stripping as a showcase. That's a common thing that porn stars will do. They use their name recognition to go dance at a gentleman's club and make money from that. So she was arrested because in Ohio there's a law that if you are a regular nude or semi-nude employee, you aren't allowed to touch patrons unless they're family members, which is really super weird to begin with. I mean, I don't think they're necessarily implying that it's okay to sexually touch your family members, but just the way it's written, it's very odd. And so she got in trouble. She was on stage dancing, and she touched a couple customers. I think she grabbed a female patron's butt, and then the officers who were undercover in the strip club came over to the stage, and then she pulled their faces into her breasts, and one of them, she slapped her breasts on their face, which, if you've been to a strip club ever in your life, that's pretty par for the course. If you approach the stage while there's a performer dancing up there, they're going to come over to you and give you attention, and in some way their body's going to be touching yours. So again, it's an asinine law to have on the books as it is, and you're trying to control the behavior between consenting individuals. So you have that logical inconsistency when it comes to stripping. Then you're legally allowed to be paid to masturbate via webcam as like a cam girl or cam guy. I don't know if there's, I've only heard the term cam girl, but I'm sure that there's gentlemen that do it as well, and people who identify all over the spectrum. I'm sure, Rule 34 for anybody who's been on the internet. So you're allowed to masturbate, and people are allowed to watch it live and pay you while it's going on to have that happen. You're allowed to, as a webcam performer, have sex live, and people pay you for that. So that's okay. You're allowed, as a porn star, to be paid to have sex on camera. They film you and another person having sex, and you're allowed to be paid for that. So that is all okay legally from the eyes of the state and from the U.S. government. All of that is okay. But two individuals outside of a camera being on and recording it and choosing to exchange money for sex is now all of a sudden illegal. and something that you can't do and something that you can be arrested for. So super logically inconsistent, makes absolutely no sense, and it's just plainly idiotic when you start breaking it down as to somehow a camera being present, it makes the exchange of money for sexual acts okay. So it's logically inconsistent just when you start to look at it like that. It's very much morally inconsistent, as I've gone over. You're no victim, no crime. You should not be able to interfere or to lock people in cages for consensual decisions that they make with other individuals. So morally and logically, it's wrong. The other thing that it does, and what we'll kind of talk about here, so the whole basis of this sting and the basis of this investigation was they were trying to break up, and this is a common tactic whenever the media talks about cases like this, as they love to throw out the word trafficking. It's always human trafficking, and rarely ever will they just refer to it specifically as prostitution. And that's meant to trigger a distinct emotional reaction from people regarding the idea of human trafficking, because it's awful and it's horrible and it's one of the worst things that a human can do to another human. Obviously, from a liberty standpoint, it's disgusting, and you're taking away the sovereignty of an individual over themselves and their body. Again, like I talked about in the first episode, the most important piece of property you own is yourself and your body, and somebody's taking away that sovereignty from you. So it's a horrible thing. The media will often use that word specifically to incite a certain reaction, because this is behavior that's deemed inappropriate or wrong, and especially when you're talking about laws and the state being involved in it, there's kind of you have to try to morally justify the existence of these laws that are logically inconsistent. So they talked about, so this investigation was 6 months long to look into human trafficking in this. So 6 months is a pretty long time. I'm not a police officer, so maybe they were trying to spend enough time to uncover all the pieces to be able to get the people that they wanted for trafficking, and that's why they took so long, while they were apparently in full knowledge that there was sex slaves, if that's what they were, and that's what the police were operating under the idea of. Then you had a 6 month long investigation where you've got known sex slaves that you are allowing to remain in that situation and doing nothing to help them. So maybe they were trying to put together the case so that they could get to the source of who's contributing to this and who's running this kind of thing and doing the trafficking. So okay, cool. If that's going to be the reason, I still think it's a really long time, especially if you're talking about human suffering in the way of people being trafficked. But do what you got to do to get the right people. That's not the case, though. There's 25 people that have been charged with misdemeanors for soliciting prostitution. So all Johns and all people that were there. 2 owners of the establishments have been arrested as well, but not for trafficking. It's for receiving funds from prostitution, basically receiving money as a result of prostitution, and engaging rather in prostitution themselves. So these 2 owners were also giving out sexual favors in exchange for money. So right off the bat, no trafficking charges. So 6 months long. And then this is where also the logic and the moral, it's hard to morally get behind this when, as part of this police operation, undercover officers went in and solicited prostitution and received sexual acts. So it's okay to receive sexual acts as part of an investigation in order to break up some sex trafficking ring, which apparently they didn't. They didn't. Nobody's being charged with trafficking, so it's been a complete fail on that board. So all we're doing is charging a bunch of guys who went into spas and basically paid for happy endings. So that's where we're at right now. Nobody is being made to be held accountable if that is truly the case. Now, another thing that when you get into situations like this, none of the females are cooperating with the police. A lot of them don't speak English. So in all likelihood, yes, this was probably exactly what they were people brought over from, in this case specifically China. Mandarin is the language that all the interpreters have had to be brought in to speak Mandarin with them. So in all likelihood, that's exactly what this is women brought over from China and forced to live in these massage parlors and both give massages and the sexual favors. They talk about fearing for their families' lives, that their families are threatened, and if they don't comply and they don't, do the sex work, that their families are going to be hurt. And that's very well possible. In all likelihood, probably what happened. The problem is that none of them are working with the police or talking to the police at all. And then when the police come out and say something like that they're all afraid to talk because they're in fear for their families' lives. The only issue with that is that there's no way to confirm or deny that the police were ever told something like that. The police are the only ones who are allowed to speak with the victims here, and then they're the ones who report it. And as anybody who's been paying attention at all around the country for the past 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, police departments aren't immune to bad actors. They aren't immune to people just not being good cops, not following through on their work, and they're definitely not immune to lying about situations. So it's very disheartening to see something like this go on for 6 months. Officers going in and getting rub and tug, happy endings, and oral sex from workers as part of this investigation. So if in any by their own admission and by their own account and by the scope and the realm of this investigation, the police officers in Jupiter, Florida that went undercover received sexual favors from sex slaves. So they were part of this. They, by their own definition, received sexual gratification from sex slaves who were there with fear for their lives or their families' lives and with no way of getting out of it. So, again, morally, you got to try to the knots and the hoops that you're trying to have to jump through to logically try to rationalize this from a moral standpoint is baffling, and it makes my head hurt, honestly. So at the end of the day, you have something like this occur and not a single trafficking charge. So where do we stand now? We've got 25 Johns, one of which is an owner of an NFL team. An owner who, by the way, is 77 years old. His wife died, in 2011. 8 years ago, his wife died, and they were married for 48 years. So nearly 5 decades of being married to this woman, the love of his life. Friends and people have talked about how he just hasn't been the same after she died. And then he does have a girlfriend that he's been dating for, I think they said, like 5 or 6 years. She has had a child while they have been together, but both Mr. Kraft and the girlfriend have gone on record to say that the child is not his. So obviously there's a openness to their relationship. It's not monogamous, at least. It hasn't been. So there's not even like the moral justification of adultery. In this case, he's takes care of both the girlfriend and the child, but it is not his child. So obviously they've got the kind of relationship where she has had sex with other people in the time that they've been together, and that's something that's okay. So not even from a moral standpoint can you try to get behind adultery. So it basically comes down to, in a lot of cases, what it mostly, when you especially when you go after the Johns, it's lonely guys that are looking to satisfy an urge, basically, and have no other way of doing it aside from paying for it, which is a pretty sad state to be in as it is. And then you're going to throw the risk of, so the charges that Kraft received are punishable by up to a year in prison, $5,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, and then you got to basically take a I guess the equivalent of defensive driving for Johns. I don't know. It's some sort of class, and it's talks about, like, I believe, like, trafficking and all that kind of stuff. Again, something that they have not charged anybody with or found anybody to charge with after this 6 months investigation, and by their own definition, something the police in Central Florida actively participated in by sending in undercover officers to pay for sexual favors. So that's what we're looking at when you come to this. So from a libertarian standpoint and from a liberty standpoint, there's no moral justification that can be used in order to justify using the state to lock people in cages for engaging in this kind of behavior. That's using the arm of the state, the police. Basically, essentially, you're using a gun at the end of the day. Like, that's what it will come down to, is somebody with a gun is going to come and lock you in a cage if you engage in this behavior. So you cannot morally justify that when you're talking about consenting adults. And logically, I've already kind of gone over that. So another reason why libertarians tend to be, and why we've got now a sex work plank in our national platform for the national party, is because when you're talking about, you don't have to look very far in history to see where prohibition fails, and where it fails always, and it fails drastically and it fails horribly, is when you ban a behavior or a product, or rather a service or a product, in which there is a high demand for it. Because anybody who knows basic market principles of economics, if there is a demand for something, there is going to be somebody that comes along to supply that demand. It's basic market principles. There's money to be made. People are willing and wanting to pay for a type of service or to pay for a type of product. And if you make it illegal to purchase such a product or service, you're going to create a black market for it. That's exactly what we've had with, you look back at Prohibition during, the early part of the 20th century, and you had, all of a sudden, you had Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, characters like that rising up to start selling alcohol, because the demand didn't go away. All you did was remove the ability of the free market to provide that service, and instead you force the market to be completely underground into the black market. And so, again, not to get overly anti-government all the time, but then you had our government poisoning bootleg liquor, killing thousands of people as part of this trying to enforce prohibition. So you literally had, it was failing so badly, and drinking actually went up as a result of prohibition to higher levels, which usually tends to happen regardless. And so you had the drinking was still in such a high demand that the government had no recourse for it but to poison its own citizens in order to try to control their behavior that way. And it still didn't work. So when you look at something like that, when you look at the epic, atrocious failure of the drug war and what the past 50 years rather, 5 decades have brought as far as the drug war goes, we are, El Chapo said it in his trial. He was just found guilty, and he said it in his trial that looking at, because he was charged here in America, and looking at the Americans in that room saying, "You created me. I exist because the United States of America are the largest consumers of drugs and narcotics in the world." Again, you can try to ban the product, but if there is a demand for it, the market is going to provide somebody that's going to sell it. And when you prohibit it, the sale of it legally, it pushes it all to a black market. So we've destroyed Central and South America with this idiotic drug war that's done absolutely nothing. Drug use has not changed in the United States in 50 years. We're still the largest consumers of drugs in the world, and we're still the exact same numbers of people are using drugs than they have ever been, and that's just strictly like narcotics and illicit, quote unquote, illicit drugs. You want to get into pharmaceuticals, it's a whole other thing. Yeah, and we'll get into that more. There'll be times that there'll be an episode for sure dedicated to the drug war and the idiocy of that, so we'll get into that more. So, and then you're going to ban a service like prostitution, the quote unquote oldest profession in the world. You can open a Bible and read about Jesus 2,000 years ago palling around with prostitutes. Like, that's been around. This job has been around for ever. I mean, as long as humans have existed in the kind of society level that we do now and have for a couple thousand years now, tens of thousands of years, the numbers kind of vary, and I don't know at what point somebody figured out that they could exchange something in return for sex. But I mean, you literally have it documented in one of the most popular religions in the world that at least 2,000 years ago there was prostitutes that existed, which means it existed far before that. So you're trying to ban something that's been around, and the demand has been around for pretty much the entirety that the human race has existed, at least in kind of the form we are now, where we're broken down into societies and we're able to communicate through words and everything like that. And so that's probably, I mean, I think I could kind of end it there. I don't think I need to harp on these points any more than I already have been. And just to say again, you're talking about the idea of consenting individuals being able to choose to engage in a behavior together and be able to choose to exchange an agreed upon amount for that interaction. So you've got this case that went on for 6 months because they're trying to break up a trafficking ring, and a single trafficking charge given down. So complete failure in that regard. They got 25 Johns, and that's all they got. You want to really help make trafficking not a thing? You really want to put a huge dent in sex slavery? Legalize prostitution. Get rid of the black market for it. Because demand hasn't gone away, and it's not going away. So stop trying to control the behavior of individuals and instead allow the market to provide for that service above the board and not underground in a black market. And that's going to be the best way to combat human trafficking and to put a huge end towards this type of thing, because there's no way for it to legally occur throughout most of the United States. And when you have something like a black market, that's where you get drug cartels, human trafficking rings. You had the underground bootleg alcohol distribution of the Prohibition era. Things that do not occur. I mean, look at alcohol. There's no violence associated with the distribution of alcohol anymore. The only time any sort of shady stuff goes on when you're purchasing alcohol is when you're underage and you're having to try to get somebody to buy it for you. Otherwise, you just walk into a convenience store or a grocery store or a liquor store, wherever, depending on the state, wherever the specific thing that you want to purchase can be bought at. And that's it. And there's nothing that makes me believe that we wouldn't see the exact same result if we were to legalize prostitution, that we wouldn't see the exact same thing happen to sex trafficking. Because why go? There's no, you destroy the entire basis of that existing. You get rid of the black market for it. Everything's above the board. People aren't going to be going out to the shady individuals in the shady areas and trying to do it without getting caught. Which all that seediness brings in this sort of element that creates, the perfect storm and the perfect environment for sex trafficking to go on. So, police officers in Jupiter, Florida, failed epically at what they were trying to do. If this was the trafficking that they claimed that it was, and it was a sex slave ring like they claimed that it was, well, then you failed. You failed miserably. And you didn't help a single soul in all of this. All you did is you're going to charge 25 dudes who paid for a happy ending after a massage, and that's it. So, you really want to help them out? You really want to break up sex trafficking? Legalize prostitution. Allow sovereign individuals to decide how they want to use the most important piece of property they own, their own body, with another individual in a consensual way, with an agreed upon interaction, with the terms that they get to decide on their own. So that's this episode of the podcast. I appreciate everybody being patient. It took a little longer to get this thing going. It took a little longer. iTunes kind of took a few days, probably like 4 days, I guess, to approve and allow my podcast to go up. So this was all supposed to be recorded. Like I posted, I guess maybe like 3 weeks ago at this point, that I had my first episode recorded, and well, it took a little bit longer to get everything going. But now at this point, I've got everything set up, so it's going to be super easy to get out episodes from this point on. So look for the next one. I will likely do it Monday, which would be March 4th. So I'm going to be posting the stuff this Sunday, and then so either Monday, March 4th, or Tuesday, March 5th, I will be posting the next episode, and then we'll kind of figure out a schedule from that point and how often they're going to occur, and I'll decide what day that I want to put them out every week, or for sure put out an episode every week, and then kind of get a feel for what things are going to be doing. So haven't quite decided what the next episode is going to be, but I'm thinking it's going to be, screw it, yeah, I'll just decide right now. I'm going to talk about Tulsi Gabbard and why I like her, and I have been so gung-ho about certain stances that she's taking in her presidential run. So we'll get into that a little bit more. here in the next episode. So look out for that on Monday or Tuesday. Thanks for listening, y'all. And remember, you are a sovereign individual. Nobody can take that right away from you, especially not the state. Y'all have a good one.